Good afternoon, everyone. This is Heather Turner. I'm the marketing director at Pi, and some of you may know, and for those that you do not know, I actually was a chef for many, many years. I was an executive chef for 8 years, and I was in the food business for 20 years. I went to the Culinary Institute of America, and I still do restaurant consulting as part of my own business. And as a part of that, it means I need to stay on top of food trends because it's ever evolving. And to me, it's a fascinating topic. And it's also important because a lot of the restaurants that I work with also serve breakfast. And that actually ties in very much so to bed breakfast and breakfast. So it's kind of a good topic to touch on. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things before we start. We are recording this and it will be available on the Pi website in the members only section by tomorrow. If you have any questions, please ask them in the question bar to the right of your screen. And so I'm going to talk about mostly what's hot and what's going on, but I am going to cover very quickly kind of what's on its way out or is on its way out. So one of the big things that we've seen is kind of power bowls. So acai bowls were kind of a hot topic in the past year and a half. That's actually going out of breakfast trend-wise, which is actually really good to see because those are actually really high in sugar. They say they're nutritious, but when you add in all the extra sugar that they give you, they're actually not really that nutritious. Deviled eggs is something I'm actually kind of sad to see go because I absolutely adore deviled eggs. But I think deviled eggs probably will never really go out of style, but the trend to have deviled eggs on everything and different types of deviled eggs is definitely on its way out. The use of truffle oil on everything is pretty much on its way out too. That's not to say I wouldn't use truffle oil anymore in cooking. It's just advertising it specifically as an addition is kind of on its way out. Kale is one that I personally love and still love, but I think we'll be glad, and many people are kind of glad to see that particular one is on its way out. But interestingly enough, there are some different types of kales coming in, not just the regular kale, more specialty kales. And they're actually predicting that those actually may come back as a trend, i.e. specialty kales. So cloud eggs is also on its way out. And if you're not familiar with that, those are those eggs that are whipped up really, really, really highly until they kind of form a cloud bed with the eggs. Edible glitter, and I bring some of these up because I actually have been to B&B's or I've seen on B&B's websites where they're advertising that they serve these for breakfast. So edible glitter that has been used on things like cupcakes, and especially if you do weddings, for example, or any specialty parties outside of just your bed and breakfasts, that's becoming a bit passé. Gourmet grilled cheese is on its way out. I don't think grilled cheese will ever die, but the trend for gourmet specific ones is kind of on its way out too. Kombucha, which was a big one, I'm starting to see kind of the trend dropping off. Cake pops is another one that I actually have seen on breakfast menus or at breakfast time at B&B's, but I bring this up again because anybody that does weddings or any other type of parties, cake pops was a trend that a lot of people and a lot of guests were asking for. And sliders. And again, I have seen breakfast sliders both in pictures and at B&B's, breakfast sliders specifically. Now, kind of what's evolving, farm to table has very much been a trend, I would say, for at least the last 6 to 7 years, but it's going to now where they're talking about hyperlocal. So it's not just a farm in the same region or a farm in the same locality. It's hyperlocal as in the farmer right down the road, or in-house, meaning you grew it yourself in your garden. So they're seeing the trend in restaurants and other dining establishments as it becoming a lot more hyper-localized. Fermented and pickled foods is very much on the upward trend. They're not saying it's really trending this particular year, but they actually are seeing it start to trend upwards. So I would personally say, based on what I'm seeing out there in the food market, that fermented and pickled foods is probably going to be fairly hot by the end of the year and probably into next year. And I actually think that's really neat because there's so much you can do with it. Infusions, which has been a trend for many, many years, but is increasing in terms of infusing products with other products that you might not normally think about. And spicy food for breakfast seems to be on its trend, and that's also incorporating things like a lot of new ethnic foods coming into the breakfast market. So we're not traditionally seeing just, especially in the US based, eggs and bacon and waffles. We're seeing a lot more ethnic food come in for breakfast specifically. In the future, and this is definitely something, and I know this is a little bit scary for everybody, this is a little bit scary for me personally, keeping track of this and still working with the restaurant industry and the bed and breakfast industry, is lab-grown meats and fishes. They are saying these are some things that we are going to have to pay attention to more and more. Hemp and TCH food products, and that's including infused products, and apparently they call them edibles. This is not something I know that much about, but I have been tracking the trend. And TCH is the stuff that's commonly known and the stuff that's an alternative to smoking cigarettes, if that's clear enough. Plant-based dining with zero waste. And this is something that we are really starting to see as a trend, and this kind of ties into the farm to table. But people aren't just looking for local and hyper-local produce and meats and fishes and other products that they're going to eat, but they're looking for it with zero waste. So they're looking for a local farmer, for example, that's using recycled bottles to store things. They're looking for long-term sustainability. So even though that you're going to a local organic farmer to buy cheese, for example, they actually want to know that this organic farmer is actually focusing on their farm being actually long-term sustainable. So they're doing crop rotation. They're doing other things in that environment to make it long-term sustainable. Now, plate presentation, while isn't necessarily a food trend, it is really important, because if you're thinking of incorporating any new menu items into your breakfast menus, especially on a regular basis, you really need to be cognizant of what it's going to look like when you stick it in front of the guest. Because in this day and age, and I think I've probably said this a bunch of times on other webinars, is people constantly take pictures of their food. It's not just millennials, it's people of all ages. We were actually out, where were we? We were actually at a hotel at the conference, and I was actually watching a couple, I think they must have been in their mid-70s, take pictures of the buffet with their food and take pictures of the plate with their food, which I thought was really interesting. So I'm actually seeing in all types of environments, people of all ages just snapping away on their cell phones. So plate presentation is super important, but also incorporating the fact that, this might taste fantastic, these new food ideas that you're incorporating to your menu, but is it aesthetically and visually pleasing as well? Should definitely be taken into consideration. Now, avocado toast is apparently still a thing. I think people say they're sick of it, but apparently it is still a hot topic out there. The fun thing about avocado toast is there's so much you can do with it, and avocados and eggs go so well together. So there's a lot of things that you can still do with avocados and with avocado toast. And the really nice thing is there's actually some great products out there that are they're offering frozen avocados, and getting fresh avocados all year long can be a real challenge, especially where you're located in the United States. In the winter months in the East Coast, for example, where I am, getting a decent avocado it's a fruitless search. But there's actually some good brands out there that sell frozen avocados. Costco actually has quite a good one. So you don't necessarily have to have fresh avocado, but you could make an avocado toast spread with these frozen avocados. I actually have a couple of bags in my freezer that we've been playing with, and you can make some really nice concoctions with those. Now, in case sweet and savory is definitely something that has been trending before a few years ago, but it's definitely coming back, and it started around November of last year, and it's been a very hot topic. And this might seem kind of a non-interesting one, but I'm finding it interesting that people are encasing things in more and more things. So they're not just using puff pastry, they're not just using separate kinds of doughs, but they're going kind of out there and looking for other things to encase in. So they're using bread doughs, they're using doughs from pie, which is kind of interesting. They're using pizza dough, for example. So empanadas are actually a big breakfast item now. That's bringing some of the ethnic cuisine in there. So it's basically anything that you could bake and wrap something into is becoming kind of a hot trend in the food service industry for breakfast, and actually across all day parts. And a day part is something in the food service business, day part. So we have the morning day part, midday day part, and evening day part. Small plates are a big thing. I know tapas, which was also technically small plates, was hot a few years ago. These small plates are a little bit different in terms that they're not offering so much variety, but they're offering literally small plates of everything. This is great if you want to incorporate some new items into a menu, is offering small plates of things. So instead of offering a full plate of your brand new item, you can offer up a small sample of it just for people to try. Cheese and fruit boards for breakfast. This is actually a good crossover because if you're offering a cheese and fruit or a cheese platter for a special or offer, which I do encourage you to look into, they do have the B&Bs that I know that are doing them and doing them correctly, and that's a topic for another conversation, are getting good sales. And this is a great way to have some crossover with that. And they can be very casually put together, and there's not a lot of prep involved in that. And they don't have to be big cheese and fruit boards, but even smaller based ones. A lot of bed and breakfasts generally will have a fruit plate, but these are trending more towards cheese and fruit boards or cheese and fruit plates specifically for breakfast. Now, salads all day long is definitely something that I've been seeing trending for more than a year now. And I have been to some B&Bs that serve salad for breakfast, and I personally love it. I'm one of those people that loves leftovers in the morning, and I eat salad at any time of the day. But I'm definitely seeing more and more of that come into kind of service in the kind of the breakfast arena. And I know that it's not just traditional lettuces, so it's alternative lettuces. It's alternative things like arugula, again, kales, but baby kale more. A lot of spinach salads involved in breakfast specifically, and especially combined with fish. So if you're serving any type of salmon, for example, and not just poached salmon, but grilled salmon, gravlax, smoked salmon. Gravlax is actually something that I am seeing kind of a trend more into getting into breakfast, and it's not a thing that a lot of B&Bs might be experimenting with. They might be going out and buying smoked salmon, which can range from fantastic flavor to not so great and also quite expensive. But gravlax is actually a really good alternative to smoked salmon, and it's super, super easy to make. If anybody is interested, I would be more than happy to share the recipe that I've been using and a bunch of different options that work very, very well for breakfast and are very cost effective. Matcha has been a trend for a couple of years, and we're still seeing it very, very hot in all day parts of the food business. So, but it's particularly interesting that a lot of people are doing things like matcha eggs. They're incorporating matcha teas and also infused matcha teas with different flavors, so maybe some fruit flavors on them. And I also saw matcha waffles the other day, which I'm not sure how they tasted, but they sounded awfully interesting. I've also seen matcha pancakes, which I've tried, which are actually really good, and definitely maybe think about serving them just as a one-off if you want to try it for, those green holidays specifically. Ancient grains is a big one that's coming in. And I also am seeing some regular traditional grains like barley, for example, being used in some new and different ways. I'm a big fan of toasted barley, which is really easy to make. And a lot of people don't understand that toasted grains, and they're very easy to toast. You can toast them in an oven at low temperature, just like you're toasting pine nuts, or I toast them on the top of the stove in a cast iron pan just till they're browned. They add such a nutty consistency to whole grains before you boil them up. And it's just one great way to add a little bit more of a dimension to a breakfast item. But I am seeing a lot more of that incorporated into things with eggs specifically, and also a lot of vegetables. A lot more plant-based and alternative options. So beans as a substitute for proteins. things like the soy products incorporated, seeing things like a lot of the ancient grains and a lot of plant-based specifically options incorporated more. So a lot less meats incorporated into breakfast menus and a lot more plant-based coming in. There is a trend towards more savory breakfasts. The sweet breakfasts apparently are not going away, but savory breakfasts are definitely coming more into style. So if you're looking for some new ideas to look around at, really start investigating some of the more savory breakfasts. I mean, quiche, for example, which quiche is so out of style, it's not even funny. But quiche is still interesting if you call it a egg tart, for example. But you could make a quiche sweet, you could make it savory. So there's a lot of crossover between a lot of the breakfast items. Pancakes, for example, can be sweet, or you could make sweet potato savory pancakes. So a lot of the things that we make traditionally for breakfast that are sweet can also be repurposed as savory items themselves. Beverages with a punch is kind of one that has been trending for a while, but we're seeing an uptick in it. And things like adding turmeric, for example, adding matcha again to fruit-based drinks, so pureed with yogurts or pureed with wheatgrass, for example, added with fruit and granola into it. So things that are definitely more of the healthy trend are kind of coming a bit more into the market. So people don't necessarily want those really, really heavy fat-laden breakfast trends, but they are using butter a lot more, which I think is really interesting. So upscale comfort food. This is obviously not for everybody. If you are a country style bed and breakfast, you probably don't want to be serving smoked salmon. I could be wrong about that one. But upscale comfort food in terms of things like mac and cheese with lobster. And that is a new breakfast item on a lot of breakfast menus, for example. So they're taking traditional comfort foods and they're adding some additional upscale ingredients to them. So this kind of actually goes back to the gourmet grilled cheese sandwiches. The big thing was brie grilled cheese sandwiches, for example, or blue cheese grilled cheese sandwiches, just as an example of that. Overnight oats is a big thing. I'll have to be honest and say I don't like the appeal, but I do not yet know if this is going to be something that B&Bs can incorporate. But I know this is a huge breakfast trend out there right now. And basically, overnight oats, if you haven't heard of it before, is basically oatmeal. It's soaked overnight in a variety of flavors and served the next morning. If you just go into Google, they'll give you a lot more information about it. If your B&B does happen to try this and test it out on your guests and you get a good reaction, please let me know, because I have heard from restaurants that have been trying this with kind of mixed results, but I have not heard from the kind of the B&B crowd whether this is going to be an interesting one or not. So heavy on the veggies, so dishes that are just all vegetable. One thing that started and kind of popped up last year, not sure if anybody's heard of it, was riced cauliflower. So it was cooked cauliflower being put through a ricer, and things like mushrooms, and also incorporating mushrooms into things like spreads and toasts. So all vegetable dishes are definitely becoming a trend that kind of ties into the healthier kind of way that we seem to be moving in terms of the breakfast venues. Creative toasts, and this one's actually kind of fun because instead of giving someone a plate with 4 pieces of toast with the same topic on it, you can change it up a little bit. So in this example, one has avocado with radish, another one has cucumber, and another one has some marinated tomatoes on them. So you can add a little bit more variety with some toasts. Toast is not just being toast, but also grilled bread is falling into that toast category. So if you have an indoor grill, like one of those little George Foreman's, using those for grilling toast up for some creative toast can be quite a bit of fun. So day part is not just breakfast. And I mentioned earlier, in the restaurant business, we call day part. So there's breakfast day part, lunch day part, and sort of the evening day part. So we're finding a lot of crossover from lunch and dinner menu items into the breakfast realm. So if you're looking for new breakfast items to incorporate into your breakfast menus, when you're searching on Pinterest and just searching online, if you're getting newsletters in, don't just get stuck on those breakfast items and say, well, we're a bed and breakfast. We have, we serve breakfast, because breakfast isn't just breakfast anymore. A lot more healthy options, as I mentioned, are coming in. We are seeing a lot more nuts being incorporated into the healthy option menus. Obviously, that is a concern with people having nut allergies. One B&B that I work with up north has actually gotten around this, and they're serving a fruit and like an infused yogurt bowl, if that makes sense, with non-alcoholic Grand Marnier, which is actually available. There's absolutely no alcohol in it, and it's really, really yummy. And they serve a little ramekin of nuts on the side that are optional, but they do ask people at the table, does anybody have a nut allergy? Just so you know, we do have nuts. If you're highly allergic, we won't even bring it to the table. And you can do a lot of fun things with those healthy options out there. I know that when the healthy trend started a few years ago, things were pretty tasteless, but we've incorporated so many other things into it, and we've incorporated things that people don't usually think about. So incorporating things like actual herbs into preparations with fruit, for example. Rosemary, for example, on a lot of fruit is absolutely lovely. Fresh thyme, for example, chopped up with some extra virgin olive oil and tossed with a little bit of honey and salt and pepper is really, really good. So don't think just about the traditional ones, but think about some kind of cross migration of fruits and vegetables and all the other options that you can mix together. We're seeing putting an egg on literally everything. So it's not just on toast, it's not just on vegetables, but we're seeing it put literally on, different types of bread materials. We're seeing put on steaks. Again, steak is another one that's coming into and crossing that line between breakfast and the evening meals. But we're seeing more and more things like steak for breakfast with an egg on top in a variety of different ways. A lot of ethnic influences are coming into breakfast menus. Has anybody seen pictures of this, or has anybody have any ideas what this is? You might be seeing this pop up a lot on Pinterest. If you are a user of Pinterest, I'd be interested to see if anybody knows what this one is. Okay, well, great. We have a couple people online who knows what this is. So this is shakshuka. Hopefully I'm pronouncing it correctly. I've made it. I'm still not sure completely how to pronounce it, even though I've looked it up myself. And it is an egg basically cooked or poached in spicy tomato sauce. And this is actually kind of a fun breakfast item to play with. I actually make it with smoked Gouda and a smoked tomato sauce, and it is absolutely to die for. But there's so many fun different things that you can do with this dish. And it's not something you might traditionally think of for breakfast, but it is definitely an ethnic influence coming in that you can experiment with and adjust the ingredients to whatever you'd like to do. These are some of the other breakfast trends that I'm seeing is coming in is some Asian influences and some sort of Southern American influences. So not just Mexican, but literally like Southern, like Brazil, for example. So things like wraps for breakfast. And some I have seen in the past egg burritos for breakfast, which I love. But I'm also seeing vegetarian burritos, burritos with tabbouleh in them for breakfast, which is actually kind of nice. And some eggs and some chopped up bacon is really wonderful. And from the Asian influence, I'm seeing breakfast sushi, which is fun to make. And this is actually kind of an interesting idea. I have not tried this one yet, but I'm definitely going to, which is fruit wrapped in rice paper and having a sweet dipping sauce with it. So side dishes are definitely emerging more and more. I know the small plates and the sides are definitely something you have to consider if you're incorporating some of this, because it is going to basically have you get in more small plates. Most bed and breakfasts do generally have a side plate for an English muffin or a fresh muffin that they're making per day, but they may not have specific plates specifically for sides, and then they have big plates. So you have to think, if you start incorporating some of this into your menus or trying it out, you do think of half of the cost investment of bringing some of these things in. Condiments and spreads is definitely something that I'm seeing more and more of, and I actually really like this because condiments and spreads are so easy to make. You basically just throw them in, I call them a Roboku by default, but a Cuisinart, or in a mixer. It's like a KitchenAid mixer. You're throwing cream cheese, you're throwing some ingredients in, and you're whipping it up as a condiment and spread. And you're serving it with some nice fresh bread. You're serving it with some quick breads, for example. So banana quick bread, for example, with a nice banana and cream cheese and spiced honey mixed together actually is really good on something like that. So there's a lot you can do in terms of condiments and spreads. If anybody needs some ideas for them, I would be happy to put together a laundry list of things that you could make condiments and spreads out. You'd probably get 1,000 pages out of me. So if you want to try some of these ideas out and you need some specifics, please let me know. I'd be happy to put that together. So some things to consider when you're adding new menu items. And you really need to think of all of these because they are important. I know a lot of B&B owners who want to try to incorporate not necessarily menu trends into their breakfast, but just some new menu items. And anytime you're starting to think about incorporating a new menu item into what you're doing, these are definitely some of the things you want to consider. So storage space really is important, especially if you're creating something that the ingredients for it you're only going to use for that one dish, for example. And just as an example of this, if you're doing something like breakfast California rolls, you're going to actually think of the fact that you need space for the sushi rice if you're going to use sushi rice, the extra utensils that you're going to need. So you're going to need a rolling mat, you're going to need a brush for brushing things on. You're going to need some extra space for any other ingredients. So rice wine vinegar is not something usually found in most kitchens, but you never know. How are you going to present it to your guests? And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. How are you going to advertise it? And that's really, how are you going to advertise it? Are you going to, say to your people in the morning, your guests when they come down, hey, we're trying some new menu items. And if you are going to actually establish it as a new menu item, where are you going to put it? Are you going to put it on your website? Are you going to take photos of it? How are you going to word the description of it? Are you going to add it as a promotion to any social media? These are all things that you need to incorporate into, planning this out. Cost, this one is huge and is something that a lot of B&Bs don't really take into account, especially when incorporating new menu items, is including yields. So peppers, for example, you don't use the whole pepper. A whole yellow pepper, bell pepper, may cost $3.99, but the actual yield, the total yield of that for a recipe is more like $4.25. So you're not costing new menus out at all or appropriately. And then, so cooking or prep time, is it cost effective? Because if you're thinking about incorporating a new menu item into your breakfast menus, is it going to cost you a lot of extra time to make this? Is it something that you're going to be making all the time? And if it is it cost effective in terms of ROTI, which is return on your time investment? So these are some of the considerations that you have to think about. Now, where do you go to look for new food items? Food Gawker is one of my favorites. It's foodgawker.com. They have lots and lots of great recipes. They have great pictures to look for things. And you can look for things that are not just breakfast and brunch. You can look for things that are, all day long type of things. But it's a great place to search for ideas. And you can favorite them. You can collect them into categories. And so it's a great way to go back to that. Pinterest, pretty much most innkeepers that I know that use Pinterest do use it for kind of sourcing new menu items and, breakfast suggestions and other types of things that they might want to do. I personally love the use of using secret boards, and maybe not secret boards, but the use for secret boards are things that you don't want anybody else to really look at. You could develop boards for saying, these are things that I might want to look at or I might want to try, and then you could incorporate it into the rest of your social media. So you could create a board for egg recipes I want to try, or bacon recipes I want to try, or quiche recipes I want to try, or egg tarts you might want to try. And bring that link to the board over to your social media and use it as part of your advertising and also for feedback. So you could say on Facebook, on your Facebook business page, hey, we're thinking of trying some new ideas. Can you guys look at my Pinterest board and see if any of these recipes appeals to you? And then you could actually run a poll on the Facebook page and see if anybody responds specifically that says, yeah, that sounds really good. I mean, to me, amazing bacon maple marshmallows actually sound really, really good, just as an example. Probably not a good one for B&Bs, but hey, you never know. It'd be fun to try at least. One of the other places that I like to go in terms of aggregating information and aggregating ideas is using an RSS reader. And RSS is Real Simple Syndication. And one of my favorite ones is feedly.com. It's feedly.com. And what you can do is you can basically subscribe to any popular food outlets online that have a blog or have articles that they produce consistently online. I mean, we all know that we get way too much email, and having to weed through emails is really difficult. So what I did was, in order to cut down on the 400 odd emails that I get per day, I started taking specifically ones out, the food journals and the food newsletters that I used to read on a daily basis, but I don't really have time anymore. And I stuck them into Feedly. And what Feedly does is it basically records all of them. So whenever I do have a little bit of free time, I can just go back to this and see, hey, these look really good. They're talking about French chocolate cake or beef stroganoff. And they've already aggregated that information for me, but it's not cluttering up my email box. This is another way to aggregate some interesting recipes. You can also do specific breakfast recipes. It's a free resource out there called Paperly, Paper.li. And you can create your own. There's also quite a few other ones that already have papers. They're kind of newspapers and that have been created from online content that gets drawn in from all over the place. And you can either have it go into your email box once a day or once a week, or you can go back to your paper online and just browse. The content on Paperly does change daily, so it's not like having it in as an RSS reader. Now, how do we do this when we want to incorporate a new menu item? This is interesting because from me, when I spent 20 years cooking for a living, I was always in charge of the menus for the last, I would say, dozen plus years. And I was in charge of creating new things, testing it on guests, which are still the same in restaurant and bed and breakfast, just different types, and figuring out what's going to work. So how do we do that without basically annoying them or sitting a plate in front of people and them saying, oh, this is not what I expected, or that doesn't look appetizing, or I don't think I like this. So this is one thing that I really wish that we had back when I was cooking. I would have loved to be able to ask online, and I mentioned this before, ask your following. So if you're using Facebook, if you're using Twitter, if you're using Instagram, if you're using Pinterest, use some of those channels to ask people. And don't just think of social media. If you're doing an email newsletter, which I really, really recommend, in terms of online marketing, even above social media marketing, using email marketing is such a great way to spread the word, but it's also such a good way to ask your clientele, your past guests, your current guests, and your future guests, if these things are interesting to you. If you're using this from an email marketing standpoint, you can also use this for engagement. So there's online engagement using social media, but if you're using email, there's so many ways that you can say, give us some feedback on this and be entered into a raffle, or give them something, a little something for free, for example. So, and they probably won't take advantage of this, because even if they are repeat guests, they will come next year or whenever. And even if they do, you're giving them a little love. So if they give you feedback on something specifically, ask them for something, what would you like out of it too? So this is, again, why I like small plates, trials, sides, and spreads. You can give them a little tidbit and tell them, you're trying this out. We'd love feedback on things. And this is probably, when I was cooking for the living, my biggest takeaway from this is use your guests as guinea pig, use them as the food testers. Don't give them the whole plate. Ask them specifically when you're cooking, if you can, say, hey, especially this is helpful if you have repeat guests, if you have really loyal guests. Ask them for honest feedback on things and say, hey, we're testing out some new menu items. Would you mind tasting this just for us and give us some feedback on it? We want to know some suggestions on it, because they're the people that are going to be ultimately, paying the bills that you're in, reserving reservations. So ask them for some feedback. So this is an interesting link to check out. I don't necessarily agree with all these trend predictions, because they are predictions for what's coming in this year. But Googling evolving food trends is definitely helpful if you want to stay on top of this yourself. Now, I do wonder if anybody has any questions specifically over what I went over, or if there were some things and expectations that you came into this looking for that I did not answer. So please ask them in the question bar to the right of your screen, and I would love to be able to talk a little bit more about those. Okay, so the first question I have is, you had mentioned in what's involving pickling and marinated foods. Can you give us some examples? Well, in terms of pickling and marinating foods, this one I actually really like because they're generally low prep. They have very low there's not a lot of ingredients to them. You basically stick them in a jar and you let them sit in your refrigerator. So if you're low on refrigerator space, this might be a little bit difficult, but some pickled foods and some fermented foods do not require refrigeration. That's definitely something that I'd love to do a webinar specifically on that topic and talk about food safety, and what different things you can do with them. But in terms of what I'm seeing out there, so I am seeing a lot of different types of kimchi. So not just kimchi is kind of an Asian marinated fermented cabbage, but I am seeing things like pickled and fermented green beans, carrots, zucchini, obviously different types of pickles, especially spicy pickles is really, really hot right now, kind of in all day parts. So I hope that answered that question a bit more. And the next question is the trend towards more plant-based food because of health issues, or do people actually like it? That's a really good question. I think it's probably more because health issues and not so much that people actually like it. I mean, I really like plant-based foods myself. There's so much you can do with it. I'm a big meat eater myself. I can't necessarily go without my steak. But I think a lot of the impact towards the plant-based foods is also because of the media. It's because we see in the newspaper almost every day that going healthy is what you should be doing. I know that we get the Wall Street Journal and we get the local Hartford Courant here, and in both newspapers on a weekly basis, I see multiple articles just on healthy food trends. So we're seeing it online, we're seeing it on YouTube, we're seeing it, pretty much everywhere. I do know that, and I don't watch them myself, but I do keep in touch with a lot of people that love cooking shows. And apparently a lot of the cooking shows are specifically geared towards cooking healthier, but actually incorporating more flavors. So I hope it answered that question. The next question is, can you talk more about lab-grown meat? Well, I guess what specifically would you like to know? I mean, I know lab-grown meat for me is kind of fascinating. It seems kind of disgusting on the outside of that, but I do really see it coming down the line from purely a food service perspective and purely from a chef's perspective. I think it's interesting for two reasons. Is one, they're actually saying once the price comes down for lab-grown meat and fish and other types of food products, it will become much more cost effective. So specifically from a cost standpoint, if you're buying tenderloin, for example, which is usually hugely expensive per pound, or you're buying lobster, which is another one that's just hugely expensive per pound, you could be able to buy that resource for half the price And in addition, it would be consistent. So right now, and I'll take tenderloin just as a perfect example of this. And I have seen tenderloin on breakfast menus, thinly seared, very thinly sliced with pepper on it. You can do a lot of fun things with breakfast tenderloin. It is pricey. But to go back to where I was going with that, we have all different types of meat grades. So there's prime, there's choice, there's select, which is kind of awful. But a lot of people don't know about food grades, and they'll go to Costco, for example, and they'll buy a tenderloin for $110, and it's a bad food quality grade. It's a bad meat grade by the USDA, but they don't know. The one thing that I find appealing kind of about lab-grown meat is the fact that it will be consistent. You won't have a lot of waste to it either. So I hope that helped a little bit. Can you give us some resources for creating appealing plating? We actually have done a couple of specifically plating webinars, and I'd be happy to direct you in the direction of those. I'm happy to do some more if that helps, but they are in the Pi members only section. And then the next question is, what trends do you see in 2019 for tea in B&Bs? Loose tea bags, sachets. That's an interesting question. I am seeing a lot of, not so much sachets, I'm seeing unique tea bags themselves. So I'm seeing the pyramid tea bags, I'm seeing the not traditional kind of foil pack tea bags. Loose, I am kind of seeing an uptick in, and in terms of loose teas and what they're being combined with, they're either being combined in glass teapots, so not just the traditional ceramic or metal ones where you can't see through, but the glass teapots with the insert infuser with a tea so you can take it out, or tea balls. I am seeing kind of an uptick in tea balls being used in the food industry. I don't know whether that's transferring over to the B&B industry yet, but it's a good option. I think in terms of being able to clean them, the teapot option is probably a much better one. I don't know if you've ever cleaned a tea ball infuser, but depending on them, they can be a little kind of gross sometimes, depending on the shape, and they do tend to tarnish, especially if they are of the metal variety. And the next question is, or maybe it's a comment, I'm a vegetarian myself. The fake meat products have come a long way, and there are really tasty products out there like the Beyond Meat, etc. And I would agree with that. This was way back now, 30 years ago. I was a purchaser for a big, not Whole Foods, but a whole food type of market. And this was basically when the vegetarian and alternative meat trend and the gluten-free trend first came out. And those original products were truly terrible. And I've had meat substitutes, cheese substitutes, dairy substitutes that actually taste better than some of the regular products. So yeah, I mean, in terms of the substitute meat products out there, especially for a substitute protein, they have come such a long way in the last few years. And there's a lot you can do with that too. Things like tempeh, for example, which is TEMPEH, if I recall the spelling. You can do things like marinate it, you can grill it, you can infuse it with a lot of different flavors. And then you mentioned influences from Brazil. Have you heard of tapioca pancakes? I have. I don't like tapioca, but I have tried tapioca pancakes, and they actually were better than I expected. The version that I tried was actually a savory, and it had some kind of spice to it, and I don't know specifically what spice it was, but it had this really lovely sour cream with some herb topping on it, and those were definitely interesting. I mean, pancakes are interesting because there's so many different types of pancakes. We have the traditional pancakes in the US, which are kind of the fluffy ones. Then we have the really flat ones, or crepes. And then we have, round ones like the Norwegians have. But there's so many different things that you can use to make pancakes specifically. I had a pancake last year that was a savory and sweet pancake. And I don't know if you would really consider it a pancake, but it was kind of, and it had shredded carrots, shredded potatoes, and apples in it. And then it was in a pancake batter. So that was actually kind of interesting by itself. And it had a not sweet syrup on it. And I thought that was it was absolutely lovely, and it was not filling, and it was quite healthy. So does anybody have any more questions? Okay. If you have additional questions, please reach out to me at marketing@paii.org, and I would be more than happy to help answer them. If you need some specific ideas or you need feedback on things that you're experimenting with your menus, please let me know. I'm here as a resource, hopefully, to help you guys out. So thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day. My email, again, is marketing@paii.org. I hope you all have a wonderful day and a great rest of your weeks. Bye-bye, everybody.